Is your organization ready to navigate the complex challenges of data management in a multi-cloud environment? And in a world where business continuity and resilience are so much more than just buzzwords, enterprises are increasingly turning to solutions that not only promise that uptime, that high availability, but also delivery in the most demanding conditions. And by that, I mean when you've got 300,000 people on your website on Black Friday. That one day of the year where you make the vast majority of your profit. So today we're going to delve into the heart of this conversation with Spencer Kimball, CEO of Cockroach Labs, the visionary behind CockroachDB. And if that sounds familiar, that's because we spoke to him 6 years ago. So if we've got some long-time listeners listening, and you might remember Spencer. But with database technology, not just surviving in the multi-cloud ecosystem, but thriving, I think it's offering businesses unparalleled resilience, scalability, and the freedom from vendor lock-in. That is the exciting stuff that I want to explore with Spencer today. So Spencer will talk about how Cockroach Labs is helping to redefine what it means to be truly cloud native and why major companies from Netflix, Bose and Comcast are betting big on this technology. So with his insights into the evolution of the database market, the strategic importance of data locality and the future of cloud data management, this episode is going to be a deep dive into the backbone technologies that ultimately power today's digital enterprises. But before we get today's guest on, it's time for a quick shout out to the sponsors of Tech Talks Daily. And in today's digital age where data breaches are all too common, securing sensitive information has never been more critical, right? Well, enter Kiteworks, a pinnacle of managed file transfer security, or MFT security. So with its FedRAMP moderate authorization, a prestigious certification that they've held since 2017 by the Department of Defense, Kiteworks stand as a bastion of security in a sea of uncertainty. So step into the future of secure file transfer with Kiteworks by visiting kiteworks.com today to see why it's hailed as the most secure MFT on the market. So once again, kiteworks.com. And now let's get today's guest on. So buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you are in the world right now, I'm going to beam your ears all the way stateside, where Spencer's waiting to return to the podcast. So a massive warm welcome back to the show, Spencer. We last spoke, I think, something like 6 years ago. So can you just remind the listeners with a little of who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be back. So I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Cockroach Labs. What we do is we make a database that's called CockroachDB. And as the name suggests, at least hopefully it suggests to people, it's a very resilient database. So it's difficult to kill, and it can survive outages that would typically take down a more legacy traditional database architecture. And in the world of cloud, it's never been more important to build your business in such a way that when the clouds suffer a failure, which they do, and these are big headline items when it happens, there's an opportunity for you to have complete business continuity. And that's really, and this is sort of a secret sauce in the database, but what the database does is it's replicating your data across different facilities, like physical facilities, different physical geographies, even across continents, to give you, and across cloud vendors, to give you an unparalleled ability to keep your business running, even when in the natural course of things, there are big outages.
And I think the last time we spoke back in 2018, you shared the tech startup story of 3x Googlers and Cockroach Labs and everything that you were setting out to achieve. And fast forward to 2024, Cockroach Labs has now been identified as a key player disrupting the traditional database management market. So can you just tell me a little bit more about the core innovations, the strategies that have helped position CockroachDB as this preferred solution for so many huge companies and household names, from Netflix to Bose and Comcast and so many more?
Yeah, I mean, those are just the companies whose logos we can talk publicly about. We have got a long list of the world's, really big, important companies that are relying on us. Key amongst all differentiators for this incredible resilience story. And when you think about the world's biggest companies that are offering use cases, whether it's, for example, retail banking or trading systems or logistics, or you know, there's some really big tech companies in there that if they went down, obviously it would impact everyone's lives in a just in the ordinary course of getting the things done that need to get done in the day. So resilience is that number one differentiator, and many of these systems have run, as well as they could have run in the past, several decades on things like mainframes, which is a very venerable legacy tech stack produced by IBM, and they're still heavily in use. And it's a really excellent piece of sort of architecture, and that within a data center provides almost unparalleled business continuity. The problem, of course, is that, and the opportunity is that things go wrong on a geographic basis. Like a storm will take out data centers in Texas. And then the question is, does your business maintain uptime, availability, good customer interactions for the potentially millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions of customers out there that are relying on you? And with the cloud in particular, but also with the technology that Cockroach is bringing, you have an ability to tie disparate geographies together, right, to replicate across regions and so forth. So that resilience story is key among our differentiators, but also in a similar fashion to how we can replicate data across geographies and really have this distributed nature to the system, we can actually distribute all of the scale that's necessary for increasingly data-intensive applications. So many of our customers have, some of our customers, I think that, with the well into the hundreds of millions of customers, and it's not just those customers that are creating traffic on the system and demand for the data. It's also increasingly virtual representations of those customers' desire. So they think about AI agents and the like, and all of these things in order to work in increasingly complex ways. Right? There's a rich user experience that's being offered that was never possible before. Every time the experience becomes richer, or something as disruptive as AI comes in and starts to generate 10 times, 100 times as much access to these services that are sort of combined in order to give one user experience, that actually increases the load on the back-end database, and that's where Cockroach sits. So think of Cockroach as a disruptive player that can scale because of its truly distributed nature, as large as it needs to be to satisfy these increasingly complex and rich sort of user experiences for all of the different platforms and services that you use in the course of a day, which these days is I think probably difficult to catalog. And then the final one, and this is I think the most interesting and differentiated, is just the reality of a modern business, right? Which has usually little difficulty appealing to people in Europe, people in the United States, people in Asia, right? And so how do you juggle all of the requirements of such a business? You need to have a low latency interaction. So that kind of argues you need to keep an Asian user's data somewhere nearby. You don't want to jump halfway across the world because those latencies can actually become quite noticeable to the end user. You also want to work around the increasingly complex requirements around data sovereignty. Right? Where is the user's data domiciled? In other words, where is it located? Is it within their legal jurisdiction? And there's a number of different industries where that actually has become regulated. And there's, laws from the countries and, various mandates and recommendations. So there's all different levels of them. But what Cockroach does with this distributed architecture is it's actually able to recognize that the location of data, the locality of it, is a very important dimension that needs to be used to restrict access in some cases, to guarantee that the data is never leaving a particular legal jurisdiction, and to provide sort of underlying capability in the database to make sure that the information that you need is close to the user that needs it, and so that you can have really great user experiences with low latency. So those are just the kind of headliners. But there's a number of sort of supporting things that our customers are looking for. And I think chief among them is sort of freedom. Right? A lot of the old school technologies really limit you geographically and to a single facility, maybe with a backup somewhere. So Cockroach kind of busts through that. But increasingly, what companies at sort of the high end of the market, so think about big enterprises, are really concerned with is what's their vendor concentration risk? In other words, do they want to get fully in bed with one cloud provider? Because there's never been more that you're relying on one of these providers to offer or to support. And so that can create a really significant dependence. And Cockroach actually allows our customers to build their businesses kind of agnostically above the public cloud, so that you're really using the best of what the multiple cloud providers out there are offering. You're sort of pulling them together to build a stronger business than anyone on their own could provide for you. And in fact, that also allows you to grapple with the reality of, okay, many of these big customers, they have their own data centers still. They want to use the public cloud, but they want to have the option to get off of public cloud. And if they're using one particular public cloud provider, they want the option to have very seamless portability to others. So all of that is really where Cockroach has a significant strategic differentiation from our very real competitors in the sort of legacy space like Oracle and in the kind of future state, current and future state, which is the big cloud providers like GCP, AWS, and Azure.
And I also think over the last 6 years since we spoke, we've seen so many big changes in the world. The world was a very different place back in 2018. And then as that move towards multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments has increasingly become the norm, how do you at CockroachDB facilitate that transition for businesses? And what would you say makes it uniquely suited to thrive in such setups?
Well, when we did this really interesting piece of research, which you can find by searching for it on Google, let's say, it's the Cockroach multi-cloud report. And we really went to a laundry list of the world's biggest companies and quizzed them about sort of where they are in terms of their usage of public cloud and hybrid. And what we found was that virtually all of these big companies are already multi-cloud. So that was an interesting finding because it was a little surprising. We didn't think quite that percentage would be. They're not all actively running their use cases across multiple clouds at once. That's sort of future state where people want to move. The reality, though, for these businesses is that through M&A or through just sort of organic internal interest, they've actually already embraced multiple cloud vendors. And many of them, as I mentioned in my previous comments, are already or have long been using their own private data centers. So when they think about like just the nature of their business in 2024, most of these big companies, they're spread all over the place, right? So what they see CockroachDB is really providing, and this is an essential differentiator that we bring to market, is it's a consolidation point across all of those different environments where they're necessarily, running their applications and services and data storage. It's called like databases, sometimes for legacy information, sometimes for regulatory purposes. They have to stay where they are on a mainframe. You want to have a point that brings all this together, right? A database that's able to run in the private data centers, that's able to actually straddle private and public. Maybe that's temporary as you're phasing things out in the private data centers, and then you're going to want to move everything into the public cloud. And the question is, when you're making that movement of your applications and services and the really critical data sources, does the underlying database, in this case CockroachDB, make that seamless? Make it so that there's no downtime as you're moving, so there's no gravity that makes it so that it's impractical to move. And that's really what CockroachDB is being is facilitating for these businesses. It's kind of like the central coordination and consolidation point where you can run flexibly in existing environments, in all the new environments, and you're not trapped in any particular decision. There's no sort of one-way doors. To use Cockroach in AWS as a starting point is not going to prevent you from moving to GCP or from moving to a situation where you're actively replicating across GCP, Azure, and AWS, which is actually a really interesting place to be in terms of being able to survive a systemic cloud outage from one of those vendors, well, you've still got the other two, right? So you've built a business that's as strong as any two out of all three of the major cloud players, at least in the United States. Like that's a pretty fundamentally interesting place to be as one of the world's big businesses, where you're not beholden to any one of these players, but you're using all three to build something better than you could possibly build with any single one.
And I think also with the growing concerns around things like cloud provider lock-in and the potential for excessive consolidation of power among these trillion-dollar tech companies that we all know about, how do you at CockroachDB empower enterprise to better maintain flexibility and avoid some of those pitfalls too?
Well, it's all about that portability promise,
yes.
Right? So Cockroach has grown up with the reality that the customers that select us are going to run us in many, many different environments. So, that's a steeper learning curve for us and for the evolution of the software, right? Because it's much easier if you say, hey, we're just building this to run in AWS. I mean, that's how AWS builds its database products. And that's a much simpler, territory in which to build, because there's fewer potential dimensions of variability. Once you say we're going to run in all three different clouds, you start to realize very quickly that the three different clouds are pretty different in some fundamental ways. They have different ecosystems of services. They have different idiosyncrasies. They have different kinds of reporting tools, different sorts of billing systems. And so you have to sort of generalize and build on top of those. Then when you add in the very necessary but sort of infinitely complex reality of the private data centers, all the different things that have evolved over many decades across many different companies and industries, that also would like to, to this point about consolidation, Cockroach needs to run everywhere. But it may not stay running everywhere because there may be some transition points, like an intermediate stages in a modernization story. But Cockroach can be there from the state A through B through C through D in order to get you to state E, right? And that's what these businesses are looking for. That's what they fundamentally need. It's not like we can just, flip a switch and have the crown jewels of the business, right? Where, all of our most important customers, maybe even, we have customers that are, holding the deposits for a significant amount of, banking clients across the world. That's not something that you can lift and shift into a totally new environment. There's many intermediate steps. And so that's what our customers rely on us to provide, like a system that works competently everywhere. And that the beauty of that approach is that gives you a foundation upon which you have cloud portability inherent in your new architecture. You weren't relying on one vendor and their very prescriptive and sort of idiosyncratic environment as the sort of starting point. Instead, you actually, just because you had to move from hybrid to the public cloud, you've actually established yourself as the way I like to say it is you've built your modernized business above the clouds, right? You're not in the stormy clouds. You're kind of above them. And so where one cloud might be stormy and having problems, the other clouds are clear. It's kind of a tortured metaphor. But like the goal here is really you're poking your head up above the clouds, and you're sort of operating from a position of considerable strength. And I think, to that idea of vendor concentration risk, this is very pertinent to the world of databases, because most of these big businesses out there are, of course, decades-long customers of the legacy database technology. And those vendors have, in some cases been somewhat monopolistic in their respective spheres in the past and haven't always had good customer relationships. And that actually really exacerbated the sort of institutional concern over how many eggs are we putting into one vendor basket. What's interesting about the world we are in now is that concentration has increased dramatically for many companies. They've kind of gone all in on one cloud provider, because now this cloud provider is not just providing a database or databases. they're providing the lion's share of a corporate IT budget, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases a year. So this is considerably larger than the vendor concentration risk people used to worry about with a single, say, database provider. So that is definitely something that's on these big companies' radars to avoid. And these I think $1 trillion companies that look like they're going to become $10 trillion companies they offer a lot of advantages. But I think the businesses that kind of surf the tsunami that's coming our way, especially with AI being added into the mix, are the ones that are going to use the best aspects of all of these cloud vendors, in aggregate, to build something stronger than you can get with any single one.
And of course, at the moment, there's so much economic uncertainty, global conflict. Businesses are challenged with doing more with less, and there's a close scrutiny under every tech project for how much business value it delivers and ROI it delivers. And the database management market is also undergoing significant changes as a result, with CIOs actively seeking ways now to cut costs and enhance efficiency and all that cool IT stuff. So how are you at Cockroach Labs navigating that shifting landscape, and are there any advantages that you see it offering businesses looking to adapt to this uncertain macro environment that we find ourselves in?
It's a great question, and there's sort of two ways to approach it. The kind of most obvious way is that we are constantly innovating to make the database less expensive for sort of a unit of work, right? In other words, in a year from now, the number of vCPUs that are running Cockroach in order to satisfy, let's call it like 1 million users on a particular service, we want to make that less expensive a year from now, right? Just by innovation, cutting costs, making the code more efficient, faster, that sort of thing. So we're always working on that. And one of the key pieces of technology we created recently is something called multi-region or multi-tenancy. So this is kind of like virtualization of databases, because it turns out that because you never want your database to become so overburdened that it starts to be unable to keep up with a workload, people will typically they create excess capacity in the database system, so they have a huge buffer. And it turns out that buffer is further exacerbated in terms of sort of what looks like a lot of overcapacity, because businesses have natural peaks and troughs in terms of their demand. Sometimes that it can be really severe. Like your peak can be 10 times larger in a like a Black Friday type situation, if you're retail is one example, then it would normally be even at the high point of, say, a normal week. So you can have those sort of periodic events. Other times it's just a naturally sort of bursty workload in terms of how things come in. Something like virtualization in the database, it recognizes that the average production database cluster is significantly underutilized. Sometimes it's so important that, it's such a mission critical use case with so much value behind it that's just the way you want to run your database, very safely, huge margins of safety, right? Other times you want to say, hey, we've got a whole bunch of use cases. If we can virtualize the database and run those with one sort of pool of physical resources, then we can realize considerably better efficiency. Like we can drastically reduce the cost of databases. So that's a feature that we brought to market in our cloud platform. And that's actually already allowing customers to realize radically better total cost of ownership. That kind of brings me to the second point. I think this is the bigger one. And that's sort of take a step back and say, what's actually required to run these use cases? There's all these different costs, right? Cost of the cloud compute, the cost of the database, the software, the human labor that's required, for example, to build the use case and to maintain it and to iterate the features. So these are the software engineers that are doing your application use case. But there's also human labor that's required to run the database, the DBAs, the consultants that do performance optimization. And what is true, and part of the reason that we built Cockroach, is that those costs, especially the human costs of trying to run a database that is struggling with scale, for example, or struggling because there's too many outages, those human costs can become prohibitively expensive. Like in the early aughts, where many internet companies were getting their start, think Airbnb and Facebook and things like that. These companies ended up having to build their own databases just because databases cannot scale. And let me tell you, it is very, very expensive to build your own database. It's a many-year project, many centuries of engineering labor, like in aggregate, go into these building something like this. So the costs of building your own database are staggering, right? And many companies have been forced to do that because of scale. So when you take a step back and you see what Cockroach is providing, it's a solution to these things where you don't have to either constantly be struggling with all of the displaced productivity and human costs there, but you actually are able to solve problems that have forced companies in the past to actually become specialists in building databases, which is that often comes at a significant cost. I mean, we're talking about tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, but what's the cost of Cockroach compared to that? It's actually minuscule because we're bringing that to many companies at once, right? So the secret to really cutting costs going forward is to use better infrastructure, right? The cost, for example, of having a cloud regional outage can be quite high to your business, depending on what it is. If that's a risk that is significantly attenuated by Cockroach's resilience capabilities, then you've just at least probabilistically saved a huge amount of cost, that could have come to your brand, or it could have just been dollars and cents in terms of lost business due to an outage, and certainly tons of engineering productivity and frustration. So those are all, I think those are the real efficiencies that can be gained by using better technology. And that's really what we've brought to market.
So as we all observe this possible decline in mainframe use due to talent shortages and advancing competing technologies, what role do you see cloud-native solutions like CockroachDB playing in helping organizations transition smoothly to that tech utopia, which is, of course, modern and scalable architectures? Because it doesn't have to be just a pipe dream, is it? You do this all the time when you're helping people.
Well, I'd say that it was a pipe dream until fairly recently. I think we've been a key player in actually moving some pretty consequential use cases off some of these aging legacy technologies, which, by the way, are very good, which is why it's been such a difficult road to a credible successor technology. And that's really what we are. What makes that possible? The reality is that there's almost nothing that's, I think, ever been created, to my knowledge, that is more resilient than a mainframe sitting in a single facility. Right? So those provide 7 nines of availability within a particular facility. Right? The problem is that the facility itself can lose connectivity or power. Right? And that's where Cockroach is bringing something that's a stronger guarantee for certain kinds of issues than what the mainframe can provide. It's kind of like you get something and you lose something. Mainframes are very great pieces of technology, but they're fundamentally monolithic, and they were designed really with the expectation that the facility that it's running in would remain connected. And if it didn't, that was just something that you dealt with. Now people don't want to deal with that, and there's technology like CockroachDB that provides a solution there. So that's a big part of it. But there's this tailwind now, which is first, the interest in running in the public cloud and in modern ecosystems, right? So you want to get out of that private data center that's running the mainframe. You want to run your applications in richer ecosystems where you can use these LLMs and things like that, right? So that's just one example that's come up more recently, but also all the different services in the public cloud. You can build better things faster, right? If you're able to use these rich ecosystems. So that's providing a tailwind, but also, as you pointed out, the people that know how to program and maintain and run these mainframes are aging out of the workforce. This is a very old technology, and it's not considered the future by many. So that's actually also providing quite a bit of impetus around our kinds of solutions. And so Cockroach is providing a slightly different flavor of resilience that is actually very important in the world of the cloud, like the world that we've all entered. And so I think it's a credible successor technology for databases beyond what mainframes can provide in the current moment. And so that's really helping these businesses say, okay, what are we going to bet on for the next 10 years? Like, how are we going to build our systems? We want to find something that's going to last at least that long, because it's a very expensive transition.
And also I wanted to highlight today is the concept of success disasters, which highlights the challenges businesses face when sudden spikes in online demand exceed their data management capabilities. And we've all seen what happens there and how it can take an entire store or website or business completely offline, bring down the shutters to their business. So can you share any examples of how CockroachDB has maybe helped companies overcome challenges like that, and any lessons that can be learned from these experiences? Because when things like this happen on, I don't know, like a big event like Black Friday, it's game over for organizations, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, losing out on that one day because your system crashes is very painful. And I actually think that risk of success disasters is increasing as the sort of qualitative experiences can become far better overnight with things like AI being blended into a particular product experience. And so you can end up with many, many people trying it out, like viral word of mouth. And so you can have, I think, unsurprising amounts of traffic that show up just because things are changing very rapidly, right? And certainly there's such a profusion of these things, and whatever really hits home, I think that can create a more acute success disaster than was really ever possible before. There's just slower word of mouth. Now that's fast, but I think you can create a game changer demo, right? In probably almost any kind of use case that you can think of. We're going to see a lot of those over the coming years, and those can all lead to big success disasters. A scalable architecture like Cockroach makes those much easier to survive. You can add those nodes in real time in our cloud platform. If you're using what we call serverless capability there, you can scale up. You don't even have to plan for that. It sort of auto scales in real time. So that's a really great way to avoid a success disaster. You just kind of, you get that for free almost. The biggest kind of lesson learned here is just, you've got to be testing for these things. You've got to identify what that max, capacity that you have a reasonable expectation for. Like, what are your ambitions? Like, what is your hope for what could happen on Black Friday? That sort of thing. You definitely need to test and plan for those things. And then you also need to architect your system so that it fails fairly gracefully when you exceed what that maximum was, because that's always a possibility. And so what does that mean? It means that your whole system doesn't go down. You can still process your max number of requests, but everyone else gets put into a queue. Right? That's not a crazy concept, but most people don't test at that point. And so their whole system can crash if they go beyond a certain level of scale. So, part of it is the database, and we offer that sort of foundational scaling capability. And part of it is, okay, what's the application that's using the database, and have we tested it at those extreme scales?
And if we were to look ahead a little further into the future, how do you envision the role of distributed SQL databases evolving, especially with the increasing integration of generative AI, which is all everyone's talking about, and that gets integrated into business operations? And with all these changes happening, what steps is Cockroach Labs taking to remain at the forefront of this evolution? Because it just feels like things are moving at such breathtaking speed right now.
I think a big part of this is that data intensivity angle. Right? When you think about what back-end databases have to contend with, it all comes down to how many agents are kind of knocking on the door, right? It used to be how many people had desktop computers, right? Then mobile came along, so now you went from like 300 million desktop computers to, 10 billion mobile devices, maybe quite a bit more. And then you had, now I think what we're going to see is sort of virtual agent proliferation. So you go to 100 billion to a trillion, right? Things that are out there hitting APIs, and there'll be more APIs and so forth, but the popular ones are going to massively, they're going to see massive waves of consumption. And so, that's going to make operational data big data. In the past, when you heard the term big data, it usually meant like everything you've ever collected on all your customers, you're putting it into a data warehouse and trying to glean business intelligence from it. But we're now entering a world where the operational database, the systems of record, those are big data. And those need to get scaled to petabyte scales and so forth. So I just see that AI has the potential to make that the reality across every industry, just because it leads into this idea of a richer user experience. Like we have one customer that fulfills orders. It's a sort of a logistics company, and they have estimated that the average number of interactions with the database to satisfy one customer order can be as many as 5,000. I just got to tell you, in like the recent past, that would be an impossibility, right? Like that would be inconceivable. 5,000 different access to the database. You try to make it one access to the database, like one transaction, or maybe several. That would be sort of the max. Otherwise, you'd overload these systems. So, like that is only going to be a trend that continues. So we actually see that distributed SQL is and this is what we've bet our company on even 10 years ago, that the trend here in data intensivity is going to make every operational use case potentially need what people used to call big data, but now it's kind of like, the goalposts are moving. So a distributed SQL, that concept of a database no longer being monolithic, but really just expanding according to the needs of the underlying use case. That, of course, is the right way to build, not just in the database. The whole technology stack has to be built that way. But the database can be often the hardest, most sort of foundational element that everything else is sort of relying on, so that they also get that scalable capacity.
A question I've got to ask before I let you go today is the database management market is valued at something like $80 billion and growing. So any future developments that you might anticipate in the industry, or things that excite you, anything you're seeing, and also how you at Cockroach Labs are maybe preparing to meet some of those emerging needs and opportunities?
This is a fast-growing market. Yeah. The expectation is that, in 10 years, it'll be $250 billion market. And, again, you're right in the previous question to really point out generative AI, and, that's just maybe the tip of the iceberg. But this is definitely the epochal shift that will launch, a million new use cases, and certainly the refactoring of existing ones. So we actually see that the database market grows in proportion to those new starts, right, and to those refactorings. So the estimates, the extrapolation of like the compound annual growth rate in database applications and so forth might be a severe underestimate. And so what do we fundamentally have to do? Well, actually, I believe that the world ahead, AI, is making the barriers to entry extremely inexpensive. Right? To build a service that looks like another service is just going to get easier and faster and require less resources. And that's already been happening, because you don't have to run your own data centers anymore. You don't have to, provision in your own machines and build them and put them into some co-location facility. You don't have to run the database anymore, or the message passing, or the provisioning of servers and things. You can use serverless compute technologies like Lambda and so forth. So a small team can build what used to take hundreds of people to competently manage. That's only going to get faster and faster. It's already happening in real time. I think that we have like an opportunity based on where we play in the market to truly be serving the businesses that are going to win in this environment. And it turns out, this is just my opinion here, but the brand of the business, the brand that a business has, and the data they have around their business, maybe operating for decades or more, and like when things become really inexpensive and there's this sort of this massive acceleration of evolution in use cases, and it's just ever cheaper to build what already exists, that's where brands are going to be the deciding factor in success. Right? What's that brand loyalty? What do people look to? What's the muscle memory? Right? If a challenger comes along and they have a way better AI powered use case, they'll shave off some customers, but how long does it take the true kind of, incumbent in that particular product category to duplicate those capabilities? Well, no longer than it took that startup to build them. Right. So like where Cockroach plays in this market is we serve the world's biggest businesses. That's just sort of hands down. Those are the ones that need our scale. Those are the ones that insist on our reliability, our resilience, because those are the brands that can't go down. Right? They're that valuable. That many people rely on them. They're front page of the Wall Street Journal if something happens, right? So like those are already our customers. Those are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of this AI boom because they can build whatever anyone else can build just as quickly. They might go a little more slowly. They'll have their innovators' dilemmas, but it's becoming there's sort of a race to the bottom in terms of the cost to produce, right? So the brands are going to be the telling factor here. That's just something that we're paying a lot of attention to, and it would be something I would look to pay a lot of attention to in the couple of years ahead to see how that dynamic plays out.
And 6 years ago, you shared that tech startup story of 3x Googlers and Cockroach Labs. And here in 2024, CockroachDB is a preferred solution for companies like Netflix, Bose, Comcast. And as you said earlier, they're just a few of the ones that we're able to name. But as we come full circle, I'm going to ask you to look back and reflect on that tech startup journey, because I think none of us are able to achieve any degree of success without a little help along the way. So I'm curious, is there a particular person or someone you're grateful towards? Maybe they saw something in you, anything at all that maybe just helped you get you where you are today, that we could give that person a shout out. But who would it be?
As you point out, success is, that has many inputs to it.
Yeah.
You don't get as far as I've gotten in my career without, huge amounts of assistance. So there's everyone that's helped to build Cockroach, but I just call out in particular, we've gotten extremely lucky in the advisors we've had along the way. And starting with one of our investors, his name is Peter Fenton, and I'll also call out Mike Volpe. They led respectively our first and our second rounds in the business, and they've both been on our board. So it's been 9 and 8 years respectively. And they have they're sort of perched at the apex of the ecosystem, watching all of these different companies. One is from Benchmark, one is from Index Ventures. And so that they're also kind of, storied industry veterans who've seen many of these things come and go. And so I would just say that they're consistent support, and it's not, it's a very challenging kind of support, right? It's very constructive, a lot of iteration and feedback and, constructive challenge just. And that has been instrumental, I think, in helping us guide our business in the evolution.
Absolutely love that. Big shout out to both Peter and Mike. And I think it's so important to recognize these individuals that maybe not aware of just how much you appreciate the help that you've been given along the way. And for anyone listening, just wants to find out more information about any of the topics we discussed today, we did cover a lot there, but for anyone listening wanting to dig a little bit deeper, connect with you, connect with your team, just find out more information, where would you like to point everyone?
Well, the right place to go would be our webpage. So that would be CockroachLabs.com. And, all of the juicy information and details and, an increasing amount of documentation and case studies and things would be where I'd go to learn everything about CockroachDB and also about the company if anyone's interested in joining.
Well, I'll add links to that so people can find you nice and easily, as well as the report that we referenced earlier in our conversation too. And it was just great catching up with you. I mean, I love how you're disrupting the database market, industry discussions today around the shift to the cloud and Gen AI, success disasters as a result of spikes in online customer demand and so much more. But more than anything, it was just great catching up with you after 6 long years where the world has changed so much. We can't leave it another 6 years. Who knows what's going to happen in that time? But more than anything, just thank you for coming back on today, Spencer.
Hopefully we won't be in a Terminator dystopia. So I hope we can connect in 6 years again.
So as we wrap up today's conversation with Spencer, I think it's clear that the path to innovation in database technology is not just about handling data more efficiently, but doing so in a way that aligns with the future of the business in the cloud. And Cockroach Labs stands at the forefront of this transformation. They're challenging the status quo and offering a glimpse into a future where businesses can truly scale without bounds and navigate that regulatory landscape with ease, and ultimately avoid those pitfalls of things like vendor lock-in. Hopefully we can get rid of that once and for all. But I think also this conversation begs an even bigger question. As more companies move towards a multi-cloud strategy, how will the dynamics of data management and cloud portability, how will they evolve? And what role will technologies like CockroachDB play in ensuring that businesses are not just surviving, but thriving in this new environment? But over to you. You've got more experience in this world than I do, so please share your thoughts. What are you doing about this? Please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @Neil C. Hughes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I'll be back again tomorrow. We'll explore a completely different topic about how technology is transforming our life, work, and world. But more than anything, just thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.